Well done. I'm sure God's got a smile on his face. Today, I'm going to be almost following on from the last message that I gave. It wasn't too long ago, and so I find myself kind of in the same place in my spiritual state. And so let's see if I can get this to work. Okay, so last time, the question that I tried to talk around was, what does God want me to do? And I focused on the verse Matthew 6:33. But seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, and all these things will be given to you as well. And to summarize that, the kind of conclusion I came to was that we need to put God in charge of ourselves, in charge of our lives, in charge of the world. We need to become like Jesus. And we don't need to worry, but our needs will be met. Okay, today I just want to start off with a different passage, 1 Timothy 6, verses 6 to 9. But godliness with contentment is great gain. For we brought nothing into the world, and we can take nothing out of it. But if we have food and clothing, we will be content with that. Those who want to get rich fall into temptation and a trap, and into many foolish and harmful desires that plunge people into ruin and destruction. So I want to start off today with just asking you guys a question. And it's not a rhetorical question. You need to answer it. Who of you can say that you're totally content with what you have? You can raise your hands, it's fine. Okay, we've got one person who's content, a couple of people who are content. Now, people are strange. As humans, we assess things by comparison. We keep scorecards. And so when I asked that question, you might have been kind of mentally, if not physically, looking around the church and thinking, well, so-and-so has got more than me, and so maybe I'm not totally content. I'm satisfied, but I'm not content. I just think, this is just a human nature. If you imagine that I had a jar of sweets here on the table, you know that game where you guess how many sweets there are in the jar. If I was to say, guess how many sweets are in that jar, I'm thinking about 150. Then the chances are that everyone's guess would range from 100 to about maybe 200. If I same jar of sweets, if I said I guess there's about 300 in there, the guesses would range from about 200 to 400, something like that. It's just human nature. We see everything through the lens of comparison. Now, if we were to fill this church with a different congregation, say you went to, I had a look on Google, and it turns out that South Sudan is the poorest country in the world. If we were to transport a whole lot of people from South Sudan to sit in these pews today, and if I was to ask that same question, the chances are a few more people might be content, because in fact some of us might even feel guilty about what we have. And we don't even have to go as far as South Sudan. According to the United Nations, in South Africa, 1 in 5 people are in desperate poverty. So now imagine that you're sitting in this church with a bunch of people from South Sudan, and imagine that you've answered the question that I asked, are you content? And you said affirmative, yes. The question is, if you are content with your lot in life, are you still pursuing more things? And if you are, why? For me, it's a little bit like if you go out to supper at a restaurant and you have a great meal and you're actually content, you're satisfied. And then the menu comes around for dessert. And you think, well, yeah, I can do some dessert. I'm having such a good time. This is working out well for me. I'm enjoying myself. Let's eat more. And after that, coffee. Well, we all know that's a really bad idea at night time after you've eaten a lot to go and have a cup of coffee, because it means you're not going to sleep that night. But in the moment, it seems like such a good idea. There's a word for it. It's greed. And greed, that's what I'm going to try and talk about today. Now, nowadays, we don't really see greed as such a big issue because it's so built into our culture. It's so much part of the way we live that we don't even recognize it. It's so much part of our culture that we admire it sometimes. We often see greed dressed up as ambition. And we look at someone and say, look at that person, they work so hard, they achieve so much, they're so successful. I wish I could be more like them. Maybe it's not always something to admire. Sometimes it is. Sometimes people achieve amazing things, and we need to look up to that. But what counts is what the real motivation is underneath it. If it's motivated by greed, then it's a sin. And it's a sin that society expects of all of us. It expects us all to take part in this. I mean, it's not a small thing. It's one of the 10 Commandments. It falls under the title of coveting. Exodus 20:17 says, You shalt not covet your neighbor's house. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife, or his male and female servant, his ox or donkey, or anything that belongs to your neighbor. So when you're looking at that jar of sweets, you shouldn't be comparing ourselves to others. We shouldn't be measuring ourselves according to the world. We should be measuring ourselves according to God's standard. Now, we all know there are lots of sins that we're prone to. And the funny thing is that we seem to take other sins more seriously. You know, if I've got an issue with, I don't want to give anything away, but if there's something that's troubling me that I'm battling with, I'll put plans into place to try and deal with it. I'll speak to someone about it. I'll get support. But greed doesn't seem to fall into that category. Issues of money are a big deal. And they were a big deal to Jesus. Apparently about 15% of everything that came out of Jesus' mouth was to do with money. That's more than the time he spent on talking about heaven and hell combined. So it really does matter. So I've got another question for you, and you don't need to answer this one. Who of you here think that you're greedy? Now, I've never thought of myself as being a greedy person. I didn't think I lived a particularly extravagant life. It was always easy for me to point out someone else who seemed more greedy than me. But in a way, I'm coming to recognize that I always have been greedy. Although I didn't value things to a very high extent, I valued security, and that's a kind of greed. It's the desire to be in control. So I think we need to examine ourselves carefully, because we shouldn't just quickly jump to the assumption that we're not a greedy person. We need to look to God's standard. How does God measure greed? It's not only about money. At its root, it has to do with our sense of ownership. It's about the word mine. Now, I'm going to read you a quote now from C.S. Lewis. It's from the book, The Screwtape Letters. And just to give you a bit of background in case the quotes gets confusing, Screwtape Letters is written by Uncle Wormwood, who's a senior tempter. I can't remember the name of his nephew, who's just starting out in the business of misleading men. And And he just keeps giving his nephew advice as how to influence people and how to further the aims of the devil. And here's a quote from that book. The sense of ownership in general is always to be encouraged. The humans are always putting up claims to ownership, which sound equally funny in heaven and in hell, and we must keep them doing so. You see, the word my means different things in different situations. For example, my shoes. You guys can have a look at them if you like. They're quite cool shoes. They're not top of the range shoes, but they're very useful to me. They keep my feet warm. They protect me from thorns. But they belong to me. And if I decide I don't like them, I can throw them away. I can give them away. I can replace them in a moment. They are my shoes. Now think about my dog. My dog also belongs to me. But there's some limitations to that ownership. Like if I decided I wanted to be cruel to my dog, I could get into a lot of trouble. Someone could report me to the SPCA. So my dog is my dog, but I don't have total control and total ownership of him. What about my time? I've got another quote from the Screwtape Letters. The man can neither make nor retain one moment of time. It all comes to him by pure gift. He might as well regard the sun and the moon as his slaves. So have you ever thought that you're greedy with your time? You know, I'm guilty of that. I wake up in the morning and I think, I've got a full day ahead of me, and that time is mine. And the moment something encroaches on that time and I don't get to spend it the way I wanted to, I feel resentful. I feel like it's a tax, that something's been taken from me. But that wasn't my time to start with. It was given to me. God gave it to me. Every second that I have has been given to me. It could be that I take one more breath and I drop down dead right here as I stand. I hope that's not the case. But I can't deny the possibility. And yet I go through life thinking that I've got this time and it all belongs to me. And I know that one day I'm going to die. But I kind of work out the odds and say, well, maybe I can make 80, 85, work out how much time I've got left, and then I convince myself that time belongs to me, but it's on loan. Here's another one. My wife. There's Kath sitting over there. Now, it's quite obvious to you, I can't view Kath in the same way as I view my shoes. She's not mine in that sense. And she's not the same, she doesn't belong to me in the way that my dog belongs to me. That's also quite obvious to everyone. It's a kind of a two-way thing. She belongs to me, but I belong to her. It's 50-50. We belong to each other. So sometimes my is a two-way street. And I think that's something we need to remember. Whatever you grab hold of also grabs hold of you. And the tighter we hold on to something, the tighter its grip is on you. And that's why we have to be careful of greed. If we start hanging on to money and things too tightly, they get such a strong grip on us that we can't let go. Here's another one, my farm. Such a source of stress for so many of us. My farm is mine, it belongs to me. I bought it, I've been paying for it for so many years. It could be taken away from me. But is it really my farm? You know, a couple of 1,000 years ago, the guys that were wandering around on my farm had no idea that I was going to come. A couple of 100 years ago, that wasn't the case. A few years from now, everyone will have forgotten that I was ever there. So it wasn't really my farm. It did belong to me, but I also belong to it. I'm connected to it. It's a place that is part of my soul, but it doesn't belong to me entirely. My farm was here long before I came, and it will endure long after I'm gone. I'm merely the custodian. And I think a lot of us get that. What about my God? Does God belong to me, or do I belong to him? Now you see, the word my means different things, but the devil wants us not to notice. The devil wants us to think that the my in my shoes is the same as the my in my God. He wants us to think that if we want something, which is we go to God and we use it as some kind of superpower to get what we want. I don't think that's the way it works. Another quote from Screwtape Letters. And all the time the joke is that the word mine, in its fully possessive sense, cannot be uttered by a human being about anything. In the long run, either our Father or the enemy will say, mine of each thing that exists, and especially of each man. They will find out in the end, never fear, to whom their time, their souls, and their bodies really belong. Certainly not to them, whatever happens. You see, in the end, nothing is mine. The idea of mine is a myth. Okay, the next thing I wanted to talk about was a thing called the pleasure trap. And I played a YouTube video about this to Kath last night. And she said, well, that's going to be quite difficult to get across. And I thought maybe I better leave it out, but then I changed my mind, and here it is. So you'll have to excuse my little hand-drawn graph there, little roller coaster ride that I've drawn on the screen there. The point of this is just to illustrate the psychology of ownership and the psychology of greed. Just points out why greed is so dangerous for us. You see, as human beings, and as the same can probably be said for all organisms, there are three things that drive us. We seek pleasure, we avoid pain, and we save energy. Those are the three things we do. And if things are the way they're supposed to be, that works fine. Because our feelings are supposed to show us what we should do. But that's gone wrong long ago, as far back as the Garden of Eden. Everything was going well in the garden, and then there was this fruit. And Adam and Eve ate of that fruit. And immediately things went wrong in the garden. They could no longer trust their feelings. They hid away from God. Our feelings are supposed to tell us, they're a signal to show us what we should do. Now in this graph here, where one is over there, you can see the horizontal line. That's kind of your normal pleasure level. It's the kind of the baseline, the contentment. That's where we should be. And the blue arrow that points to the top, that's like kind of the pleasure level, a level of happiness. Now we bump along, sometimes above the line, sometimes below the line. And then I'm just going to use junk food as an illustration as to how this works. But the same can be said for any kind of greed, or any kind of addiction. And addiction's an interesting thing, because I'm not going to talk about it much now because I really don't feel qualified to speak. But around about a third of the population are considered to exhibit signs of addiction. And I think it might be a lot more than that, because I think we can broaden the definition of addiction quite far. So we're sitting around at number 1, and we get something nice, like, I don't know, maybe it's chocolate or maybe it's a hamburger. Pick your food, and that food has been cleverly designed by people to tick all the boxes. It's full of sugar, it's full of fat, it's full of salt, all those things that we programmed in our DNA to seek out. You know, when we didn't have fast food, that was fine, because it just gave us an encouragement to look for energetic foods that could sustain us. But now we chow down. And we only want that kind of food, because number 3, energy saving kicks in. It's just the easiest way to get all that good stuff. So we eat, and the graph climbs. We get happy. It gives us pleasure. And you can think, well, okay, what's so bad about that? You know, okay, maybe I have a heart attack, or get diabetes and my life's shortened. But look how happy I am. You know, I can live with that deal. The problem is it doesn't work like that, because we don't stay up there at number 2. Because what got you to enjoy that fast food was all the pleasure centers in your brain. As it tasted that food, it just lit up like a Christmas tree, and it said, yes, get more. Because those pleasure centers are all designed to motivate us, to single out from a crowd of things that are happening, the things that are really valuable, and to make us focus on them. But if you're eating fast food all the time, those things no longer stand out, and you become accustomed to it. And you start to dip, and you end up at number 3. You're still eating all the fast food, but you're not getting the pleasure from it anymore. And that's what greed's like for us. If you're pursuing money or things, at first it feels great. There's nothing wrong with those things, and it makes us happy. But then we hit a peak where we keep on getting more and more things, but they're not making us happier anymore. And then we dip down back to our normal baseline level. But one thing has changed. We're now using all our energy and all our time to pursue those things, even though we're not getting the reward anymore. Then the crunch comes, number 4. We recognize that all this junk food is bad for us. It's not giving us any pleasure anymore, so what's the point? So we think, well, let's just give up the junk food. So we stop eating hamburgers. Or we try to stop the cocaine. Or whatever it is that your particular addiction is. We know that it's the right thing, but our feelings don't agree anymore. We start to feel really bad. We go cold turkey. It's difficult, but we need to go through that so that we can get back to the baseline, so that we can reset our system. And when it comes to greed, going cold turkey means sacrifice, means giving up things, means becoming generous. And you've got to be careful, because we can think, oh, I'm going to give up things, I'm going to clear out my cupboard, and all the clothes I don't wear, I'll give them to charity, and that'll fix that problem. But you've got to be very careful, because what you might be doing is just making space for more things. You mustn't just give up what you no longer want. If you're at point 4 and you're doing it right, the things you give up need to give you some discomfort. So now I'd just like to have a look at a passage from Luke 12, verse 13. all the way through to verse 21. If some of you are starting to get worried that I didn't have enough Bible in this message, here's a bit. Someone in the crowd said to him, talking about Jesus, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me." Sounds like a reasonable kind of request. You know, if you're having a bit of a dispute with your brother about money, and here's a rabbi who seems to know what he's talking about, let's ask him to rule on the issue. Jesus was a rabbi, he knew the law. And maybe the guy was hoping that Jesus would come up with something like in Deuteronomy 21, where it says that the firstborn should get a double share of the inheritance. Sometimes I wish my dad had read Deuteronomy, but he didn't, so I only got my single portion. Maybe that's what the guy had in mind. And here's Jesus' response. Jesus replied, "Man, who appointed me a judge or an arbiter between you?" Kind of seems a bit harsh. I mean, here this guy is just asking a simple question. He's wanting a bit of wisdom in the situation. Maybe he's wanting what's rightfully his. But Jesus doesn't seem to have too much patience with that. Why do you think that is? Perhaps it was because the guy was being focused on ownership. He was too tied up with the concept of what's mine. Maybe that annoyed Jesus a bit. Perhaps it was because, I mean, think of this. Put yourself in that position. You're in a situation where you get to come face to face with the Son of God. And you get to interact with him. Is this really the best thing you could come up with? Is this really the best thing that man could say in the face of God? Jesus, help me get what's mine. You see, greed makes our focus narrow and we become small-minded. Jesus is offering so much, but all the man thinks is my stuff. He's turning God himself into the ownership, the idea of my God into my shoe. How can I use God to get my way? In verse 15 he says, "Then he said to them, watch out, be on your guard against all kinds of greed. Life does not consist in an abundance of possessions." Watch out. It's strong language. And when it comes from the mouth of Jesus himself, we need to listen. We need to take notice. Be on your guard. It's as if we're under attack. Greed is a weapon that's actively being used against us. And I think this is the reality. But then we have to think, what is greed? You know, if greed is being used against us, we need to be able to recognize it and defend, in order to defend ourselves against it. Well, the word greed in this passage actually comes from the Greek term kleonexia, which literally means have more. Greed is the inappropriate drive to have more. You know, we live in a capitalist world. The whole structure of our society is built on and founded on this drive. And Jesus went on to tell them this parable. And he told them this parable. The ground of a certain rich man yielded an abundant harvest. He thought to himself, what shall I do? I have no place to store my crops. Nice problem to have. Then he said, this is what I'll do. I will tear down my barns and build bigger ones. And there I will store my surplus grain. and I'll say to myself, you have plenty of grain laid up for many years. Take life easy, eat, drink, and be merry. Doesn't this describe exactly how most of us want to live? Couldn't describe it any better. This is like the perfect description of like the American dream, which we've all bought into in the Western world. Work hard, and when you are successful, store stuff away so that you can rest. Take life easy, enjoy yourself. This is what I'm ashamed to say I spend a lot of my time doing. I spend 7 hours a day, 6 days a week, trying to achieve this very thing. If only I could get this right, I would be secure. I wouldn't have to worry anymore. I think I've skipped a couple of slides. God's response to that. But God said to him, you fool, this very night your life will be demanded from you. Then who will get what you have prepared for yourself? This is how it will be with whoever stores up things for themselves, but is not rich towards God. The word demanded in this text comes from a Greek word, which is basically a financial term. It refers to the repayment of a loan. Your life will be demanded of you. Have you ever really taken on board the idea that your life is not your own? That it's on loan, and it can be taken back at any moment. Every breath you take is a loan to you. The loan has no set repayment period. It can be called in at a moment's notice. Then who will get what you have prepared for yourself? This is how it will be with whoever stores up things for themselves, but is not rich toward God. See, we need to be rich towards God. I'm not exactly sure what that means. But I've got an idea. I believe that includes seeking to put God in charge. I think it includes seeking to become like Jesus. I think it includes recognizing that we own nothing, that it's all on loan. I think it involves make everything that we are and everything that we have available to God. I think it involves being generous to God and to His creation. You all hear the saying, you've all heard the saying, sharing is caring. Now, if you picture a child, maybe around the back here at Fireflies, the children are playing at playtime, and there's a child that's hugging all his toys to his chest, shouting, mine, mine. And the more toys he's got, the harder it gets, because he can only hold so many. And when one drops to the floor, he starts to panic in case one of the other kids gets hold of it. He's refusing to share, and yet he's wondering why no one wants to play with him. He's going to cause conflict, and he's not going to enjoy his time at school. We've all seen a child like this. We've probably all, at some stage, even though we might not remember it, not many of us can remember what we were like at the age of 2 or 3. But at some stage, we've probably all been that child. And maybe, at some level, we still are. We need to become rich towards God. And that's my message for you today. It's a challenging message. But if we want to live the life that we're meant to live, and we want to get fulfillment out of life, we have to give up on the myth of mine. We have to break that pleasure trap. And we have to become rich towards God. In closing, I'd just like to read Proverbs 28, verse 25. The greedy stir up conflict, but those who trust the Lord will prosper. Thanks very much, everyone. We can just close in prayer. Lord God, we come before you now and we just kneel before you. We just offer ourselves to you, Lord. Just ask you to reveal your truth to us. And if there's anything wrong in the way we view you and we view our place in this world, we just ask that you might prompt us to understand that, Lord. Pray that you might show us how to become the people that we're meant to be. Pray this in the precious name of your Son, Jesus.